start.
Welcome to Swim Out of the Box, Episode 3, where we will be focusing on rotation.
Calm it down. I love the enthusiasm. Calm it down. Because at least in these headphones, you were just yelling at everybody.
Yeah, but I can fix that in post-op.
Okay, sure. So, let's review. Episode number 3
is on rotation.
Yes. And what have we already covered?
We have already covered in Episode 1, body position. Episode 2 was kicking. So today, Episode 3 is on rotation.
Cool.
Is that better?
Okay. So we're joined by Dan.
What's up?
You can wave to the camera.
I'll wave to my microphone.
You're on camera.
I know.
Okay, just letting you know. So Dan's going to help talk about rotation. I'm going to take these off.
Oh, you don't like it?
It's really, excuse me, I'm choking on an almond. It's really loud from you. So, it's all good. It's fine. We'll see how it comes out at the end, and if not,
it's just natural.
Whatever. So, rotation. We're talking again specifically about rotation in freestyle, just so that we are clear, right? So the last 2 episodes were body posture for freestyle and kicking for freestyle. I think even though we're talking about this in segments, right, it's really important to recognize that they all work together. Here is a really great example, actually. This morning, my last client, before I came here, had done lessons with another instructor about, I don't know, a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And all they worked on was rotation for her 5 lessons that she did. Okay? But because for her, the rotation was just isolated and told her, like, basically to think about rotating, she couldn't do it. So this morning, all I had her think about was what her arms were doing. And what her arms were doing helped her rotation. And what her arms were doing helped her posture. Alright, so her kick got better because her posture and her rotation got better. It's kind of remarkable that me teaching her how to use her arms properly helped all those things fall in place, right? So it's really important to realize you don't just go, oh, I'm going to focus on my posture, all right? You have to focus on it and isolate that thought for a while, but at some point you have to start kind of making connection and go, well, how do all these things fit together?
All right, so let's back up just a little bit.
Is that a lot?
It's a little bit much to begin with. So let's start with the origin of the rotation.
Okay.
Where should rotation in freestyle originate from?
I don't know if it's one origin story or multiple origin stories.
Okay. So for different people it could be things, but let's say...
No, not even for different people, for everybody. Right?
Okay.
So it's not like some people will force their rotation because they'll use their legs too much. Okay? Some people will throw their elbows behind them to force their rotation, right? Well, it's a little bit of legs, a little bit of arms, and it's a little bit of core as well. That's what I'm saying. It's not one spot that it's coming from.
Fair enough. So let's narrow this down a bit for the listeners. So if I was to initiate rotation, would I want to think more about my core or my hips leading it?
I think it's a case-by-case basis, honestly. Yeah, I think it's a case-by-case basis, honestly, because, I mean, I think that's the way that everything we do, though, is like, I've had someone where, with their rotation, I actually did have to start with their kick because their kick was so terrible, and basically some people's problems is that they're basically throwing their leg forward as a counterbalance, and that's how they're rotating.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you have to see the person and how their stroke started before you can really make an accurate assessment as to what you need to correct to be able to rotate efficiently and get in control of it, because maybe someone's arms are out of sync, but maybe their legs are also out of sync. So it's like, where do you really start? I always try to start at the legs, because if you're kicking too big, it's going to be impossible for you to, be able to rotate efficiently.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a really hard question, just because everybody is different.
I think part of it is recognizing when somebody's a little bit more lower half dominant versus upper body dominant. All right, like the lady that I was talking about today, she was clearly using her upper body to help her swim, which is what we want, right? So I like where you said either it depends on either if you're lower body dominant or upper body dominant. What would be something that people could cue in on to distinguish if they're upper body or lower body dominant?
If they have a sensation that like their kick is doing a lot of the work, is it your kick that's doing a lot of your work to move you forward, or is it your arms? Right? We talked about this a little bit maybe, but around 80% of your forward propulsion should be from your arms, right? But that doesn't mean it's natural for everyone to just do that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you feel like you're doing a lot of kick, or if you feel like in order to speed up you have to kick more, you might be a lower dominant person. And in that case, I would want someone to focus on what their legs are doing to help their rotation.
Okay.
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. I think we should take a half step back.
Okay.
Okay. So
and distinguish
I
what
think it's
is
important,
good rotation.
I think it's important to realize why we need to rotate.
Okay, fair enough.
Right?
So we'll shelve this and come back to it.
Don't worry. It'll be your job to bring us back to
it. Got it. All right.
All right. So we need to rotate because the rotation of freestyle allows mobility in your shoulders to take a proper recovery. Right?
Mm-hmm.
A proper breath. Right? So you're on camera, right? So you can just say it. You don't have to mind it.
I know. This is for the listeners.
So we want rotation to help with mobility through our shoulders. We want rotation to help us with mobility through our neck to take a proper breath. We want rotation to help us with an extension of our arm. So once it's in the water, you have to be slightly rotated. So for instance, if I want my right arm to be extended forward, my right hip has to be down. I get a little bit more extension that way, right? So if I want to set my anchor point, my catch, as far as I can, my right hip and that right arm would have to be down, right? So that rotation gives me extension, it gives me mobility. So rotation is really important for mobility, really important for breathing. So my preference for rotation, amount of rotation, is 45 degrees or less. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think, like, as far as conceptualizing, like, what we're saying, like, if you're listening, a good test I like to show people as far as how imperative your hips are to not only swimming, but literally, like, your whole life, is if you were to stand up and you try to look behind you, your neck's not going to turn 180 degrees. What's the first thing that your body has to do? You literally have to turn your hips to make sure that your head can get to that position, which, in swimming, right, you're not going to be able to get a good breath without being able to actually rotate those hips to help you get there, right? So a lot of people are like, I don't need to rotate because my arms and my shoulders are doing all the work. Like, yeah, but then maybe some people come to us and go, I'm having trouble breathing. Well, maybe you're having trouble breathing because you can't get your face out of the water because
you haven't turned your hip.
You haven't turned your hip at all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I mean, when I was growing up, I never got a good answer from any of my coaches of why I need to rotate, and they told me, you rotate because that's what's going to give you power. And I didn't understand that comment. I still don't necessarily 100% understand that comment.
I mean, that makes sense to me now.
But, because in my mind, having your arms and your hips synced up gives you power, not just rotation. So
right.
That's how my mind works. Right? It's like, rotating gives you power. Well, no, that's not true. If I just rotated, I wouldn't move forward.
Well, right. Okay,
it's not a turbine, right?
It's the combination.
All right,
that.
you need both.
better.
But I think that's
Exactly.
like what a lot of like coaches have a tendency to kind of glaze over. Like that's I think what makes the difference between a good and a bad coach sometimes is because
Louder.
sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
So like I think a good and a bad coach, like sometimes a bad coach will just kind of be like, all right, we'll do this, but they'll never answer the why. And I think like good coaches are going to break it down and say, oh, well, the reason we want you to try and rotate your hip more is to get more power out of it. But that's something that, you know, a lot of people don't understand, and they just go, oh, they just told me to do this, so I'm just going to write it off because they didn't really, you know,
Yeah, it doesn't serve any purpose.
explain the importance of it or
Right.
anything like that.
Okay.
So I'm going back to this still. I'm not done yet. So I said 45 degrees. Is
Before you get, I was about to cycle back. So
I'm on
45
topic.
degrees or less, but what is the minimum?
35.
35 degrees.
I know it's not a huge margin of error, but when it comes to your hips, it's actually a lot of wiggle room there.
What 90
No pun
degrees would be your hips are facing the wall of the pool.
Right, and I was going to say 45 is the minimum that you need for mobility. Okay?
Okay.
Well, I guess that statement's not true. But we'll say this. At 45 degrees of rotation, you will have enough mobility in your shoulders and your neck to perform the tasks that everything is supposed to do. At 90 degrees rotation, which is a very popular amount of rotation for some athletes,
I guess for people doing catch-up drill stroke, like they'll go all the way to 90 degrees to try
Right.
and lengthen it out.
right. And there's something to be said about learning, right? It's okay if I'm learning how to rotate to exaggerate, right? Big movements easy to learn, but it's a learning phase, and you can't and should not stay there. But if you over rotate to 90 degrees, you're asking for a lot more requirements of balance. Your balance becomes a lot more difficult at 90 degrees. There is no benefits to being sideways. I don't understand how this myth has occurred, but somehow, some way, some swim coach told somebody that if you're on your side, you're more like a fish and more hydrodynamic.
Well,
that's just
I mean,
not true.
It's not true because you're not getting the same pull out of it. But if you do think about it, if you look at them sideways, right? Oh no, it's the exact same. You're
If
right.
you look at them sideways or this way, it doesn't matter.
Right.
They're still equally hydrodynamic.
Exactly.
So it's a silly, very silly thought to think, well, I turn all the way sideways, I'm more hydrodynamic. More realistically, you turn all the way 90 degrees, you will become less hydrodynamic because you will lose your balance and your posture, and that's when chests start sticking out and legs start flaring out, arms start sweeping across their bodies or wide, or I've even seen people use their heads to try to help them balance, where they stick their head to one side of their body. Seen it, right? So over rotating can be a good way to learn sort of movement in general, but it at some point has to be reduced down.
Okay. Fair enough.
So we want to make sure we don't over rotate as well. Going back to what we were talking about, arms or legs or core, I think it's all three. Your lat attaches to your pelvis, right? Am I correct with that?
Pretty sure you are.
You want to Google it?
I do want to make sure I Google it.
You can
just
use your
in
phone if you want.
case.
I'm
Okay.
positive of it.
I'm pretty sure too, but I just want to make sure.
So if your lat connects to your pelvis, if you contract your lat, it will automatically give your hip some rotation. Does that make sense?
It'll give it rotation, or it'll give it more strength / stability to accomplish a rotation.
It will start to pull it, actually. It will like start, if I contract my lat, it'll actually pull my hips slightly up, depending on which lat I'm contracting. Just a little bit. It does give it
So
some
it just
rigidity.
starts to
sure.
initialize the
Right.
movement.
Right.
So no, it doesn't insert to the pelvis.
What does it insert to then?
It inserts to
What?
the spine.
Which vertebrae?
Most of the
Lumbar.
thoracic and lumbar.
Well, yeah, I'm more concerned about the lumbar. Which vertebrae on the lumbar? Do you know? Just
Oh,
for me,
okay,
by
hold
the way.
on. So
Anyone listening is probably
the other thing
who
is
cares, but I care.
it's the origin. It's not the insertion. Insertion is up here. That's what
Right.
why is it pulling down. The origin includes, there's a lot of here, spine T7, spinous process of the supraspinatus ligaments, all lower thoracic lumbar, sacral vertebrae, lumbar fascia, posterior and third iliac crest.
Sacral vertebrae is the key. So
Okay.
that where it connects to the sacral vertebrae is basically your pelvis.
Last 4 ribs. I mean,
Basically.
okay,
It's not
fine.
exactly your pelvis, but it's your sacrum. So,
Okay.
right? Not to be, you don't want to be too technical, but
Not too technical, guys. Just ignore the last
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
So, my client this morning, who I was working with, asked, "Well, which one comes first? Do I pull first or do I rotate first? It's at the same time."
Yeah.
That's why it's hard, because you have to have those two things working together, and then make sure you don't use your leg as a counterbalance and stick it in front of you, right? So what happens is people will kind of like push forward against the water so that their pelvis comes up. It's leverage.
Yeah, we're making this way too complex. I mean,
I know.
this is great. If we really, for a later episode, we really want to go into the muscular dynamics of how this thing...
I think the kick out as a counterbalance is actually like something that is very common that we see.
So common.
Oh, yeah,
because
that's important.
That,
That's
yeah,
like the
I mean,
lower
if we wanna,
dominant
if we want to
thing.
nix the like musculoskeletal relationship that's causing that, okay, but
With the biomechanical
Yeah.
reasoning.
but I think there's an important relationship between the effects of when people have their leg kicking out that causes them to have a poorly constructed rotation, I guess we'll say. The basis is based on momentum and counterbalance rather than any sort of control,
Okay.
which then ends up having other effects, like if you see people breathing and then keeping one arm out as a crutch because
Or behind them.
or behind them because why is their arm behind them? It's to counterbalance the already created counterbalance
Right.
of your leg. So
Right. It gets complicated. But that's kind of why we have jobs. So, I think I need you to write down the time for this because I'm going to put a video in.
Okay. I mean, I've been writing down
primal roll. Okay?
the primal roar.
Roll.
What? Oh, that's not nearly as cool.
So, I like to show people on land how to do a primal roll. You know what that is, right?
Actually, they don't.
Okay, well, I'll show you later.
That's good.
Basically, you're laying on your stomach, hands extended overhead, so your arms are straight, and you basically pick up one leg over the other and let the weight of that leg roll you over.
Isn't that just like a log roll?
It's called a primal roll in the strength and conditioning world. So that's what I call it. Because
Okay,
I
well-
don't want to get signals crossed. But that's important to practice because then that person can learn that the weight of their leg moving back helps them rotate, not the pressure of their kick pushing forward. So
Okay.
I'll add the video so people can see it.
Perfect. All right.
It's this hard thing to kind of paint with words.
Yes.
It is.
100%.
Right. This is why we do things in person.
Yeah. That would be a thing. All right. So, getting back on track here.
I got it. You ready?
Okay. Here we go. Let's see where this goes.
Some things to correct, to keep in mind.
Okay. Things to keep in mind. There we go.
All right. You want to make a list for me?
I am already ahead of you. I got one thing on that list already.
Okay.
Over rotation.
Well, this is how we make sure we're rotating correctly.
Okay.
Don't let your arms pull behind you. So if your arms are traveling behind the midline of the body, meaning like the side of their body,
Okay.
right? They're using their arm as almost like a counterweight to move their hip. And more realistically, what will happen is people will rotate so far through their shoulders that their hips will then just keep up. And we don't want independence like that. We want our whole shoulders and our hips to be rotating together. So if you take your arm out of the water to recover and your elbow is behind you, you're gonna sort of force bad rotation.
Which is where the feathering out comes out. It becomes a part of it.
Exactly right. All right. Same thing goes for taking a breath. If you go to turn your head to take a breath and you need to turn your head to the ceiling in order to breathe, it's because you haven't rotated first. You're turning your head and you're letting your head determine your rotation for you.
Okay.
Hips are the driving force, not your head. Got it?
Right.
Good.
Hips are the driving force.
Yes.
I think another good way to like show that you're not pulling your arm back too far or that your shoulders are beating your hip is kind of what I learned a long time ago. I think from you even was from like kind of that line between your sternum and your belly button staying straight, because if your sternum starts to break that line, that means that you've lost that core stability. So whether you want to think about it as your arm pulling back too far, or
Yeah.
if you can view your sternum and your belly button line easier than that, it's going to kind of accomplish the same task.
I like
So draw a line between your sternum and belly button.
And that, yeah, and
Connect the
when you're
dots.
swimming, you should always be able to make a straight line. I mean, yeah, it should basically be if you put a metal rod between your sternum and your belly button, that metal rod should stay completely straight while you're swimming. So.
Yeah.
There you go. So then there's the wide kick, all right, or the splayed kick,
Mm-hmm.
right? Forcing your legs forward too far to press against the water to rotate your hips. So obviously that's going to cause a lot of drag. You're sticking your leg out in front of you like that, it's going to cause a lot of drag. So that's why we want to minimize that. Yes, it's a way that people have found to rotate. Unfortunately, it also comes with a lot of drag. So my suggestion would be, can you put a pull buoy in, not kick at all, and still rotate?
Okay.
You should be able to. And if you have a hard time with it, then you know you overuse your legs to help you with your rotation. If you have a hard time controlling your kick when you put a pull buoy in, put it between your knees or your calves. Then you can't kick at all. Make sure you have good posture. See if you can rotate. You should be able to still.
Yep.
So, any other like
We need one more here.
movement things that happen that cause people to rotate kind of funky?
Yeah, when you're saying splaying, you're saying like horizontally.
Horizontally or laterally. It's still a splay.
So what I get people to do is I'll have them hold like a small kickboard so they can still feel their legs sliding back and forth, because I feel like the pull buoy sometimes will kind of inhibit the kick so much that they literally, it's not about like, I'm like, okay, we've done great kicking, you know how to rotate, how do I put it all together without making sure it just goes out the window? I use
So you're
kind
saying
of a
when
really,
they're swimming, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm telling them to pull, get rid of their legs to feel the rotation.
well, even, yeah,
first.
so even if you're doing,
So this could be a progression.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I guess
absolutely.
this
That's
would
what
be
it
like
sounds
kind of a progression. I had one guy, so we used a really small children's kickboard between his legs, and you don't need a lot of like thigh strength to hold it there, but it just keeps those legs together, and you can keep it small, because if you go too big, you're not gonna be able to hold the kickboard. If your legs watch the sides, you're not gonna be able to hold the kickboard. So he decided that he was not going to buy a kickboard, and he was going to use a cutting board from his kitchen. So he went to the pool with a
Kickboards
cutting
don't float,
board.
do they?
No, but he managed to like hold a cutting board between his thighs and do the same drill. But I think it's a good progression as far as using kind of the
Right.
pull buoy rotation and then still making sure you're kicking correctly.
Right. We talked about this last podcast with the kicking.
Right,
How
yeah.
I like to add a little bit of something between someone's like a kickboard or a pull buoy as they start kicking to force them to keep their kick small. So it's a perfect progression. Do it without kick first. Make sure you can actually rotate without kicking, and then see if you can add just a little bit of kick and still keep good posture while you rotate. So I would say the other thing people like to do a lot of to help compensate for inability to rotate, or it's really balance, is they stick their chest out and their back kind of like goes the opposite way. So now they've created this U shape that's very hard to tip over. Right? Does that make
Yeah.
sense? So it's a weird thing that we as people feel like we're gonna fall over while we swim. There's nowhere to fall to. You float.
Yeah.
So
Or
but-
sink.
But you always like there's this like have you ever done like a 1-inch fall? Have you ever had that sensation?
Yes.
All right, it's like your brain doesn't know you're only an inch off the ground. So when you feel like you're falling for that like half a second, you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna die. Oh wait, no, I won't. that's how I kind of like talk about the rotation. If you feel like you're off balance, you're going to do something drastic to make sure you catch yourself. So it might be stick my chest. Oh my god, I thought I was going to fall. Oh my god, I'm going to fall. All right, so making sure you're not going to fall, even though you feel like you're going to. It's not going to happen. Keep the rotation 45 degrees. That sensation will happen less.
But I think also a problem that I think I've run into as far as like answering like, oh, where does the rotation come from? Are you legs? Are you core? Are you arms based rotation? A lot of people that I've seen that go into, you call it a U shape, I call it banana shape, whatever you want to call it.
Bananas. Yeah.
It's all people that like are very athletic, but then they realize that they don't have as strong of a core as they thought they did, and so they end up recruiting their lower back muscles to try and help keep their balance, which then leads to, unfortunately, one of my guys who this happens to a lot has a herniated disc now. So
That's not
he's
good.
gonna have to go through some recovery now. But at the same time, I think he's always been like, oh, my lower back's so tight from biking from this. It's because I don't think he's recruiting his core muscles, and I think that's a big mistake that I think a lot of people make is, oh, like I'm skinny, I look athletic. Well, like looking athletic, looking muscular. It's not just about kind of, oh, look, I can see your abs.
I would almost say that it has more to do with the biomechanical. So in regular sports, regular sports, because most of them don't take place on a liquid. It don't take place in a liquid medium. Yes. So here's the thing with regular sports, and I remember reading this in an article done by someone who's looking at core and swimmers, and I actually found that so we'll get to that. But what he says is that the core muscles usually have some sort of like index to pull from. So like if your leg is planted on the ground, you can pull towards your leg because you have resistance there. Mm-hmm. In a liquid medium, you have your leg and your arm, but they're not anchored at any point. They're moving through the liquid. Exactly. But that's the thing, is it doesn't have a relative place to pull from to get that strength. So it's really difficult for people who come from a land-based, activities to a liquid to suddenly need to use their core in a different way. And this gets into the second portion where I know, Dominic, when you were working in your lessons, you use both the leg and the arm. The more resistance that you feel from that, the more your core is going to activate, and that makes sense because you're giving your core muscles some place to pull from, some extra resistance to get that reactive
your core wants to react.
Right, exactly.
So, that goes back to our very first podcast about not forcing core tension, letting it react, setting it up so that it can react. So it's not core strength necessarily, it's sequencing. Like, is the core going to sequence properly, or are you just going to use your lower back?
Yeah, basically.
Which is also your core. Right? It is. I consider anything from the top of your neck down to be your core.
Yeah, to your pecs. Your pecs are core muscles, apparently.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely they are. Absolutely. Are they a part of your thorax? Yes.
Thorax? What are we, insects?
This is your thorax. And you use all of your thorax. I use most of my thorax muscles to breathe. So do you. Thoracic muscles, thank
Thorax.
you. Yes. But it is a thorax. So, dry land stuff for rotation. Do you have anything?
For rotation.
So I like to start with a basic plank on hands, not elbows.
Oh, yeah, and then using a stability ball underneath your legs and then rotating your core.
You can do it without a stability ball to start, because that makes it a lot more difficult.
I mean, okay,
so you can go into like a side plank and pointing up to the ceiling. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I do, but then you're doing that whole thing where the whole body turns instead of just a portion of it.
I want the whole body to turn.
Okay, fair enough.
Right? I want people to be able to go from a plank position and then take that...
The thing is, I feel like I could cheat. I wouldn't even use my core muscles. I would just use legs and arms. I wouldn't even use my core muscles.
So, going from the plank to the side plank, you should feel a transition from basically like a general core stability to the side of your core stabilizing.
Okay.
All right, so you should start to feel that change, and then you could do it on a stability ball like you
See,
just said.
personally, I would rather do wood choppers. So either with a band or cable, you start up high and pull down
Yep.
towards your hip down here, arm straight all the way down, and really making sure your hips aren't moving too much and letting your actual core muscles do the work.
Yep.
Rather than using your hips and your legs to just drive it through.
Right.
So it really isolates it, and that's going to be the kind of thing you got to really
That'll help
isolate.
strengthen the
obliques.
muscles. It doesn't reinforce the movement though.
Fair.
That's all, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's land, so we don't need to try to recreate what you would do in the water necessarily 100%.
Well,
But
I would
it's
think
like
it'd be
two different approaches. One is to say, let's get those muscles strong. The other is, can those muscles be recruited? when they're
Personally, I
supposed to?
wouldn't even say it's for strength. I would say it's for the neural adaptations, the pathways, the neural pathways for them to start firing at a better and consistent rate,
Yeah.
which takes some time to develop.
Yep.
And you'll see that with when you first start going to the gym, the first immediate gains that you're going to see in like your weight and your ability to do extra resistance training is in fact related to neural pathways and your motor units firing better and recruiting more of your muscles rather than, oh, I gained more muscular strength.
Yeah.
Or not muscular.
I know what you mean.
More muscular size,
Yeah.
Girth.
Girth.
Muscular girth.
Yeah, for some of my people that I know that like to recruit their back muscles, I like to try and do some exercises that literally will just have them laying on their back with flattening their back out because they have no idea what those ab muscles are part of the reason that they're recruiting their lower back muscles because it's not just like,
Dead bugs would be good for that.
yeah.
I mean, pelvic tilts, pelvic tucks, that's what the word
Well, literally just laying on your back and trying to lay your back flat, that's like the simplest thing, and there's a lot of people that can't even do that because those muscles are never truly worked by doing classic crunches or all those
Or
kind
other
of-
muscles are just being overused.
Yeah.
So then those muscles can't.
Well, right,
completely
you're not
fire
using
properly.
you're using your rectus abdominis more than your transverse abdominis.
Right. Or vice versa. You never know. I don't know.
yeah.
No one's gonna know.
Right.
So-
Well, I mean, there's ways to figure it out, but that's
Yeah.
beyond the point.
Yes, it is. So, my big thing is making sure if you do something on land with intention to change something in the water, when you know you're doing the exercise correctly, you need to start almost visualizing that you're in the water doing it. Right? There's something to be said for pretending and letting your brain kind of go, okay, this is what it's going to be like when I swim, kind of. I'm going to make sure I rotate. My whole body's going to stay one piece when I rotate. Like going back to my plank example,
Okay.
right? Or I'm going to make sure my sternum and my belly button stay in line as I bring my arm up towards the ceiling from my plank position, right? So can you start to visualize yourself doing the swim actions while feeling these sensations? Because first of all, your brain is crazy powerful when it comes to these types of things. That's why visualization helps. And if you can start to visualize yourself in the water while you do it, it will make more sense to you once you're in the water. But if you just go to the gym with the intention of, I'm going to get these wood choppers done, and put no thought into how it actually helps your swimming or how you might feel it in the water, you're going to miss connections, basically. Opportunities of connections. Make
Okay,
sense?
fair enough.
Kind of? Is that too woo-woo for you? Do you not believe
Yeah,
in
I don't.
visualization?
For me,
Evan?
it's like.
There's been research that shows if you visualize
Oh,
yourself
yeah,
running,
I mean,
you actually
obviously,
recruit those muscles, those neural pathways for those muscles.
I mean, yeah, there was this research study that if you think about going to the gym, suddenly your metabolic rate increases a little
I'm
bit.
thinking about it right now. Done for the day. Not going to the gym.
Don't do that. No, but the thing is that trying to recreate exercises that would
Yeah.
simulate
Mhm.
a liquid medium,
It's impossible.
it's just really difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're doing stuff like they have in the space station where you're doing suspended treadmill, you're suspended, and the treadmill's on the wall, and you're doing it that way. I mean,
So maybe we need to start sending swimmers into space, which is going to be the next SwimBox expansion, SwimBox and NASA partnership.
SpaceX partnership.
But I mean, that would be
it'll be with SpaceX.
that would be the thing that you would need to do is suspend the swimmer in air using bands and then change the resistances of the bands depending on what muscles you want
Well,
to
I don't
strengthen
think it's
in the
about
pool.
like all these exercises aren't about like literally completely recreating your swimming on dry land. It's like how can we best try and do this?
It's almost like
right.
an echoing. It's
Yeah,
like
that's
an
the
echo
thing,
of what
but
of the movement.
To do that, you need to stimulate the muscles that are going to be used, and you're not going to find the best like transitional
Right.
exercise where this exactly is the movement that you're going to feel when you're swimming. You're just not going to do it because I've tried doing I've tried like investigating like doing this with like a cable. It doesn't work nearly as well because you're standing up and doing. You would have to be horizontal and doing
it's
it.
not the same.
It's you could. I mean, you could hinge at
But
the
even
hip
then,
and go
you're
down
hinged
and
at
do
your
that.
hip. Right?
Exactly.
Well, that's different than swimming.
Right.
So.
So I'm sure there's ways to do it creatively,
Yeah.
but in general, that's going to be really hard to like and make very specific.
I think it's
exercises.
important to just note, do the exercises to gain some insight. You're not doing the exercises
Right.
to make your swimming better.
Right. And
It
it's
will
just-
a little bit, but it's not going to be like, oh, I didn't need to go to the pool today. I did my dry land.
right.
doesn't work that
Exactly.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say it's used to figure out the pathways. Is what I would use dry land. Maybe some strength gains, power gains specifically. I would want them to focus on power and endurance rather than pure strength.
Yeah, and I find that if one of my clients is demonstrating a sway back or lordosis out of the water, well, that's going to be their default in the water. So you can almost guarantee from the very beginning if that's that person's natural posture, you're going to have to correct that in a flat position first, and then you're going to have to re-correct that when they start rotating.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they start rotating, they lose their balance. They're going to revert right back to that bad posture. So it's a lot to think about, but it takes time. You have to start with good body posture first.
Followed by kicking.
Primarily kicking first. Like I said, I gave you an outlier today who we worked on her arms first.
Right, fair enough.
But for the most part, it's kicking, getting your kick to a point where your kick is not in charge of your hips, but are supporting your hips. No body part should have a primary role in rotation.
Right.
It's working in tandem with legs, hips, and arms. Right?
Yep.
So,
Going over the 5 things.
what are the 5 things?
The 5 things that I have written down is don't
Written
let
down?
your arms come too far back. If your elbows are coming out of the water first, you let the arms come too far.
So, by the way, since we're there, if somebody's feeling like discomfort in the front of their shoulder, where their shoulder meets their thorax,
You mean their glenohumeral joint here?
Yes.
Okay.
all right, if you feel discomfort there while you swim, you might be pulling your arm back too far. It's not a guarantee. There's other things that could be going wrong, but that might be part of it.
Okay. Second thing, don't if you've rotated and then having to turn your head more to the ceiling, you've over rotate or you under rotated.
Under rotated to support your breath,
Right.
and you're letting your head turn
Do
to your
the
hips.
rest, right.
Yeah.
3. Make sure there's a straight line between your belly button and your sternum throughout your entire rotation.
Beautiful.
4. Minimize the influence of your kick on rotation. So if you find that your kick is kicking out too far, you need to rein it in.
I wouldn't necessarily say like minimizing the effect of it, but just like restructuring your kick so it has the right effect. on
Okay,
it,
so
which is what he was talking about.
find
with
the happy
primal
medium.
roll. With the primal roll, like if your leg is pulling back, your leg's momentum is already pulling back the right way that you want to be rotating. So it's not about okay, maybe the less I kick, the easier it'll be to rotate. It's not about that. It's about kicking the right way.
Got it. Okay. And 5, keep your spine relatively straight. You don't want to have an over curve in
No
either
droopy
direction.
spines, right?
Right.
So
listen to that list, a lot of it is very dependent on the first two topics we talked about.
Of course,
very dependent
yeah.
on your posture, very dependent on your kick.
Right.
And make sure, what I get to see a lot of is when people do rotate, they stop kicking sometimes too. Don't ever